Hey YouTube, Dawson Ryder here. Welcome to my next installment in my Sentai 50th Anniversary series, where I look back at all the Sentai series I've watched and give a retrospective on my experience. Not a full formal review, of course I'm going to give my thoughts and might highlight certain arcs and review aspects, but it's not like my usual series reviews. But I might do rewatches one day and do that. Anyway, so Ohranger, this is going to kind of be a very mid video, just because that's kind of the way I feel about Ohranger. All the previous installments in this series so far, I've had kind of personal stories about my experience with Zyuranger, Jetman, Dairanger, Kakuranger, but this one was one that it was just like, I watched it and it was fine. So there's not a lot of personal history of like, I watched it and then I waged war against it as I hated it so much, and then I rewatched it and I loved it and it's my favorite. It's just kind of like, yeah, it was there. It was one of those ones that, it's really funny because Zio is very nostalgic for the Power Rangers fandom. For me as well. It's one of my favorites for nostalgia, for the suits and everything. I do think it gets a bit overrated. I think mmpr Season 3 is actually a bit better. Hot take. The stakes were a little bit higher. The Rangers' backs were to the wall. Anyway. Regardless, I think Zio is hyped up a little bit more in our community, and so it's one that's special to me for Power Rangers, but unlike Zyuranger, where I did kind of beeline for it out of curiosity, I never really beelined for Ohranger. It was just kind of one in the pile that was ready when I wanted to watch it. It was never high up on the list of like, I need to watch it. I was definitely curious. I do remember seeing some stuff at various points about like, oh, it saved Sentai or whatever. I feel like Sentai's just constantly had cancellation rumors since even before it came out. Like, when Go Ranger was first announced, they're like, new series announced Go Ranger, but it's on the verge of cancellation. Will it be canceled and replaced by Metal Heroes? That was like really the only notable thing outside of it being from Zio. So it was just kind of one that was like, I'll get to it when I get to it. And this is kind of tied to the previous stories about my other experiences. Like I said, I watched Kakuranger when I was working on that video series that again is on ice. And I decided like, I don't want to like force myself to go through Dairanger because I really want to watch Kakuranger. And I finished Kakuranger, wound up loving it. And then I was kind of on a Sentai kick, so I thought, you know what, I got the DVDs, let's pop in Ohranger. I haven't seen that one yet, and I watched it. And it's a very interesting series. It's very similar to many things I don't like about certain 90s Sentai I've seen, like Mega Ranger and Zyuranger, where you have a lot of filler again, and most of the filler revolves around following another character. And like if the episode is about O-Blue, it's not really about O-Blue, it's about who O-Blue is following around. That sounds so weird to me, the O-Red, O-Blue. Like, I've seen the series, but recently when I was filming one of my Gojuju reviews, they did, like, the Legend transformation, and I was like, oh, it's O-Red. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. I'm gonna sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. I looked it up, I'm like, oh, that's what it is. No pun intended. It's one of those ones. Thankfully, it's not just following around a bunch of kids, which is just weird for the Zyurangers, you know, honestly. We need Chris Hansen on that. Is that the guy that catches predators? Anyway. It's like that, and I hate those type of fillers, where filler is fine if it's entertaining or I feel I've spent valuable time with it, but most of the fillers in this, yet again, was one where it's like we're following around a nothing nobody that I don't give a fork about, so that was a little bit annoying. And also, as a result, I feel this was a very forgettable cast, at least with Zyuranger, even though you had that story going on with the filler being about other characters, and like I said in that review, I only really knew Barai and Geki and then Goshi because he had a sister, but at least all those characters I can remember what they look like, I can remember their personalities, and the Ohrangers just kind of all blended together for me. Outside of King Ranger, just because he's the 6th Ranger and he was also sort of a kid again, this was a very forgettable cast for me in comparison to even Zyuranger, which is kind of crazy. So this shared a lot of the problems I have with that type of Sentai, and yet I just enjoyed it a little bit more. Maybe it was because I was watching it on 1.5 times speed like you should, because you gotta get out of there fast. You know, those Impractical Jokers and Office reruns aren't gonna watch themselves. And then also, you know, just being on a Sentai kick coming off of Kakuranger, and there was no like driving force of like, I have to finish this or anything, that I was just able to enjoy it. And I think it did have some highlights. Yet again, some parallels to Zyuranger. I really enjoyed the beginning parts because I thought the mythology for this was really interesting. Like later on, as they start to explain things, it had a bit of that Sentai nonsense explanation to stuff. But the beginning setup about the ancient civilization and all the groundwork laid, I thought was really cool and was one of my favorite like Sentai mythology frameworks. And it really fit the way the suits looked and everything. I really liked that. And unlike Zyuranger, I thought that there was a bit more happening as you got later on. There was more multi-parters. Like, I remember the storyline around when the Super Zeo Megazord, or whatever it's called there, debuted, and I'm like, oh, there's actually more going on. And so, compared to Zyuranger, where it felt like plot beats were fewer and far between, there were several more serialized mini-arcs that I think made me just enjoy the series more overall. And something I obviously like about this series, which comes from Zeo, is I love the suits, and yet again, I keep finding it funny that there's so many parallels to mmpr and Zyuranger's thoughts, where I think these were like the perfect suits for us in America to use choose for this new era of PR. You know, I think Ohranger landed at the perfect time because they were just so specifically appealing. And as some people pointed out in the comments of my Ohranger video, which I didn't really know, that like, I guess I did know on an aesthetic level just looking at it how much Ohranger stood out compared to the more tech-leaning Sentai. You know, you did have stuff like Live Man, but this was really when we started to get into creatures, and then the Megazords looking better. There obviously is a couple standout mech, but for me, a lot of the pre-Ohranger mecha all blend together, so people really pointed out that Ohranger was revolutionary for opening up Sentai more creatively, which I kind of thought about when I looked at it, but I didn't think about it in the context of Sentai's culture. But regardless, that kind of worked out for us because I think Ohranger was kind of the perfect suits. I'm not saying there's not a reality where maybe we started with Ohranger or Jetman or Liveman or whatever, and we still would have PR today, but you can't deny that how well designed those suits are and specifically appealing they are contributed to PR success. And I think, not that Zeo started a new wave, because arguably from mmpr Season 3 here, it just kind of fell off a little bit for a lot of people. But for that whole like new next-gen era, I think they picked the perfect suits to start off on, because it's almost like the opposite, where we were used to creature stuff and all that and whatnot. I mean, of course we had creatures with the mecha, but you know what I mean, like this was much more of a tech-ish looking, like little ancient future tech looking. You know, they were a little bit more clinical and modern looking, like they looked like a Power Ranger, but they looked different. And it was the perfect kind of setup for this next generation era. I think they picked absolutely the perfect suits for that, and I think that just worked out really well for us. I know this is supposed to be a Sentai video, but I just thought about that with the suits. But yeah, overall, Ohranger is a series I don't necessarily see a lot of strong opinions on either. Like, I never see like a hate campaign against it. I never see like it's anyone's favorite. It just feels mid, and that's why this video kind of feels like that, because I feel like with a lot of the other series before this and after it, I have more of a personal experience and story and relationship with it, whereas this was just kind of another one I watched, which is honestly fine. There's nothing wrong with that, honestly, and maybe there's some hate for it, but I kind of would put this one personally, I'm going to put it on the C tier, just because even though it had a lot of the things I didn't like about Ohranger, I think that there was a lot more that I did like with the mythology and a lot more arcs, where this was just kind of a relatively easy, if not kind of boring, plain oatmeal watch. I kind of have no strong feelings one way or the other towards it. So very exciting video for today. But let me know what your thoughts are on Ohranger in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.